In KeyForge's very first set, called the Archons, Beefy Dragon was the biggest creature in the game at 12 power. Having such a huge amount of power surely required some sort of a drawback, right? Well, Beefy Dragon could only be played if you had 7 or more Ember. Throughout the rest of the set, we saw other high-powered creatures given certain limitations to balance out their power as well. Chuffape and Yixlik's Dominator enter play stunned, Grommet doesn't let you play creatures, and Shadow Self doesn't actually deal any damage when fighting. 8 power seemed to be a tipping point for this sort of thing, with Troll having the ability to heal himself being a prime example of this. As time went by, things started devolving. Suddenly, 8 power started seeming like too much to the designers for some reason, too powerful. Groggins, an 8 power creature just like Troll, was limited to only fighting flank creatures, and certainly couldn't heal itself. Tintadlin only dealt 2 damage when fighting. Then we reach the infamous Worlds Collide Brobnar, where we find Narp at 8 power 1 armor, who actively hurts your battle line. Tintadlin, meanwhile, was a bit of a trendsetter, pioneering the concept of high power creatures dealing less damage than their power would suggest. Saurian introduced a couple creatures that did the same thing, Pterodactyl being one of them at 12 power, but only dealing 4 damage with 4 splash. The other was Gargantodon, taking Beefy Dragon's place as the highest power creature in the game at 16. This continued into Mass Mutation with cards like Galetops and Gladiodontus. But Mass Mutation introduced a brand new type of creature into the game, gigantic creatures, monsters supposedly so large that they required 2 cards to fit on. Though 2 of them, namely Niflkong and Ultra Gravitron, didn't surpass or even match the highest power we'd seen in the game at this point. However, they were given some of the flashiest effects out there, which didn't stop once they hit the board. They had crazy fight reap effects to follow up with. Deuceless was the one to set a new record, at 20 power with incredible play fight reap effects to boot. These guys had no drawbacks other than the fact that you needed to have both halves of them in hand at the same time in order to play them, which wasn't always the easiest. They each had a card that could help you in getting them to hand quicker, but it was always tough to decide whether to chain yourself with a single half or pitch it in favor of cycling and drawing new cards. Dark Tidings reprinted lots of those creatures that dealt less damage than their power, and introduced some more that were just hard to play. Others had drawbacks, but were flashy and unique when they successfully hit the board. And of course, there were a couple tide-dependent ones as well. But there was one creature that was something of an anomaly in this regard, the Chosen One. This creature is 9 power with no drawback. It doesn't have conditions attached to it. It doesn't deal less damage than it's supposed to. It doesn't hurt its neighbors. It can reap and fight freely, and on top of it all, it has an amazing passive effect. In the midst of these other rather mediocre high-power creatures, the Chosen One rose above all of them and started something new, shifting some perspectives on creatures with large amounts of power. Enter Winds of Exchange. In this set, things got a little more creative when it came to creature drawbacks. Gone were the days of entering play stunned, and you can't deal that much damage. Now we have things such as Belligerent Guard, at 8 power who enters play ready, but your opponent draws a card upon play. Frost Giant doesn't ready when cards naturally should, but is super unique in the way it tweaks the algorithm to purposely bring in extra cards that can ready and fight, whether they're Legacy Gang or Chieftains, or Maverick Grey Riders, or anything in between. Rampaging Brutodon and Grondel both interact with a new token creature mechanic. The only questionable ones are Tweet Kraken, a truly horrific reprint, and Chaosodon, though Chaosodon doesn't even feel that bad most of the time. Unfathomable also broke the previous record of 20 power with Tangaika at 25 power. 25 power with 2 Ember Pips and Splash Attack 5 and a fight effect, but he's quite difficult to get on the board, utilizing some convoluted cultist token creature mechanics. Similar to pulling off an epic quest or forging with Blorb Hive, successfully playing Tangaika is something of a KeyForge accomplishment. Now, Grim Reminders, the next set in line, is kinda just throwing all this stuff out the window. Massive power values are being slapped on creatures left and right with little to no drawback. 8 power is no longer the tipping point, now it's more like 10, and that's only depending on what condition you're in. Rickety Cybergiant is 11 power, and just deals 1 damage to itself after it fights. Heavyweight Morik has Splash Attack 2 and a neat scrap ability that provides direct damage. So long, Krog the Clumsy, it was nice knowing ya. Sandworm is 16 power, double pip like a Dust Pixie, and shuffles itself back into the deck upon fight for a recurable third of a key. Webster has Taunt and helps players get haunted quicker when it fights. These next 2 both enhance a few bonus icons and can only ready if you're haunted. Awakened Titan at 10 power has Taunt, whereas the Red Death at 12 power has an awesome fight effect, gaining you 1 Ember and an extra card. When I look at creatures like the Red Death, I can't help thinking, far gone are the days of things like Grommet or Narp. Grim Reminders also once again breaks the record for highest power creature, Thing from the Deep at 30 power, which reads, Thing from the Deep cannot be played unless Open the Seal is in your discard pile. After fight, steal 2 Ember. Open the Seal is a blank card that enhances an Ember and 3 discard icons, that at least 1 copy of will always appear with Thing from the Deep. So there is a limitation to when this gargantuan creature can be played, but it shouldn't be a very difficult one to work around, particularly in this set, and once it does hit the table, it poses a terrifying threat, having the ability to one-shot virtually any enemy creature and steal 2 Ember in the process. So in the end, high-power creatures have seen quite a back-and-forth evolution. From Call of the Archons through Worlds Collide, they saw a rather unfortunate decline, and even in mass mutation they were still held back quite a bit, though the 3 gigantic creatures were a really cool iteration of them. Dark Tidings introduced the Chosen One, then Winds of Exchange onwards we saw them brought back in full force, better than ever, maintaining their positions on the board, being able to fight multiple times without dying, with some pretty awesome effects and rewards to boot. Their restrictions became more creative, or were just done away with altogether, or they were tied in somehow to the mechanics of the set they appeared in. It's always struck me as interesting how 10 and 12 power creatures were created as monsters so enormous they couldn't fit on a single card, but a 30 power beast many times the size of a pirate's galleon can fit on one just fine. It just requires something to open the seal for it to arrive. And, just like any creature, they can always be destroyed in one blow by some direct removal. Whether it's a 2-power creature or an 8-power one, a draining touch or a kaboom, creatures can be wiped out in an instant. And it's the constant shifting and volatility of boards in KeyForge that make massive creatures like these ones not totally broken. They're still dangerous and can pose a pretty big threat for sure, but there are ways to deal with them. From the iconic KeyForge dragon to the savage looking sandworm and everything in between, I'm realizing that the gigantic creatures of mass mutation don't feel so gigantic anymore. And there we have it. The average power level of creatures seems to be on the rise, and I think it'll be interesting to see how or if the game shifts at all to accommodate that. If you have any thoughts on that, let me know in the comments below. And yes, I know that Effigy of Melrot can technically become a creature with 100 power and 100 armor, and that would technically make it the biggest creature in the game, but it starts out as an artifact, not a creature, so I didn't include it. Thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you all again in the next one for the 4th day of KeyForge Christmas. See you later.